about the first 6 months after taking office, where 13 new state governors, well, they collectively borrowed 226.8 billion naira from domestic and external financiers. This emerged as findings showed that 16 state governors also increased their own debt profiles of their states by 509.3 billion naira, with domestic and external debts of 243.95 billion naira and 265.37 billion naira. The external debt was calculated based on the exchange rate of 889 naira per dollar that was used by the Debt Management Office in its report. This is according to an analysis of the latest subnational debt reports that were released by the DMO. For a conversation, we again turn to Program Officer at the Democratic Governance Department of the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, Sulaiman Mande. Third time is the charm, Mr. Mande. Good to have you back here on Newsday. I hope, yes, it seems like you can hear me clearly. So let's just get right into it. These large loans that the numbers that we read out are staggering. In addition to the huge federal releases to the states, what are they all for?
Well, thank you so much. Yes, staggering loans indeed. I think this is any deviation from the norm. The reasons given by the governors for collecting these loans is purposely for them to execute projects that are meant for public good. For example, projects around healthcare, for example, projects around education, projects around security, curbing the insecurity that is currently bedeviling some of the northern parts of the country. So these are, I think, some of the reasons given by these state governors for collecting these loans. And it is important to point out that before now, we envision some really serious challenges that may come up when collecting these loans and even after. I remember our executive director, Malam Awaraf Sanjani, has spoken extensively about how the consequences of the debts that have been collected by even the previous administration will be a huge burden to the next administration and invariably cast a very, very difficult times for the ordinary citizens. So I think, going back to your questions, the reasons for the loans are just for some very important projects that the governors wants to execute around healthcare, education, and most importantly, security issues.
You know that the Zamfara state government, has denied reports of borrowing about 20 billion naira. According to them, the immediate past government received just 4 billion out of the 20 billion naira loan requested, for the Zamfara Cargo Airport project, and they even said that the funds have not yet been utilized. So is it possible, that there needs to be a re-examining of this report from the DMO? Absolutely.
In the event that somebody denies an allegation, there needs to be a thorough investigation of the report and scrutinize the facts and bring out facts to the general public. And it's important that the governments at all levels to play by the rules of transparency, because we live in a democracy. The citizens expect their governments to be transparent to them, to be open, to allow the free flow of information that relates to their welfare, their social security, their economic advancement, and even their political progress. So it's important for governments to be transparent. And in the event that any agency of the federal government, for example, found out that there is false narration, or maybe a state government, like the case of Zamfara at the moment, denies some of the figures, then there needs to be a thorough investigation around all that.
What do you think the impact of this report will be? Will it have any effect on the way the government handles their transparency issues, or do you think this is just another bunch of numbers and more issues to come?
Well, absolutely. Going by the history of our governments and how they always choose to play their games, right? I don't think if this is going to add any value to the way they do their things, but it's important that this report is out in the open, is out in the public, so that everybody can go and read it and know what's really at stake and know what's really going on in the country, so that they can be able to hold their governments accountable and they can demand their governments to be more transparent in the way and manner in which they run the affairs of their states.
But can we expect a reduction in the level of borrowing, especially this year, 2024, following the rise in FAC allocations to the three tiers of government, especially the states, following the removal of fuel subsidy? Do you think we'll see a reduction moving forward?
I beg your pardon, please, can you come again?
I said, do you expect a reduction in the level of borrowing, by the states following an increase in FAC allocation to the states following the removal of fuel subsidy, following the removal of subsidy on petrol?
Well, that depends on the overall priority of the governors, right? But we expect that, of course, because there is a significant increase in the federal allocation to the states, we expect that, of course, the amounts of monies they borrow to drastically be reduced. And most importantly, to show the public, the people they represent, the kinds of projects that they intend to do with the monies that they borrow, and also to also be transparent enough to play by the rule of openness, to ensure that the people have their trust, have their own confidence, so that going forward, we will not be having all these issues of, so much burden that wants to destroy almost the economic and social and even political structures of Nigeria.
Well, Sulaiman, what's the way forward now?
This is an interesting question, and I think there are a number of ways that we can be able to prevent all these unnecessary borrowing. Like I mentioned before, our executive director, Malam Awara Franjani, have been speaking about the consequences that we're going to face in the future, right? So it's important to ensure that governments at all levels put out measures to ensure that the monies they borrow, they channel them into projects that will facilitate the repayment of those loans, so that they don't have to be worrying about, their federal allocation being cut, like the governor of Kaduna State, Obasani, just last week mentioned that out of the 10 billion naira federal allocation in March from the federal government, over 7.5 billion naira was cut because to service their debt. So in the event that they provided an avenue or a channel that provides, that facilitates the repayment of the projects they executed or they implemented, for example, to generate enough revenue that will facilitate the repayment of those debts, I think we wouldn't be where we are today. The governor wouldn't be complaining about, their money is being cut to service their debts. So I think this is one of the ways, and for the governments at all levels to be creative enough to provide creative solutions to the very serious social, economic, and political challenges we are facing in the country. And I'll say this with every sense of confidence that every political problem have a political solution. Every political problem has a solution. It's a question of motivation. It's a question of whether our leaders have the political will to actually make policy choices and policy decisions that will have a meaningful impact on governance, on democracy, and that will ensure that the citizens they represent enjoy the dividends of democracy. So overall, I think it's important, number one, that the governments should be creative and innovative enough in channeling the monies they borrow into implementing or executing projects that will facilitate the repayment of those loans without necessarily touching their federal allocations, and also in the fact that they must be able to account for their actions and also be transparent enough for their own citizens.
Well, Sulaiman Mande, Program Officer at Democratic Governance Department, Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.